point onward. And once again, we're a nice small group, which is great because we can keep this relatively informal. So if you have questions as we go along, I invite you to unmute and just ask them, just like if we were in a room together. But if you don't have your audio connected or having technical difficulties, you can certainly use the chat box as an option. So I'm going to pop that open just so I can keep track of whether there's any messages coming in. And with that, we will get this show on the road. So I think I know everyone who's with us, but just in case you forgot, my name is Katie, and I am the program manager with Clean Annapolis River Project. We are an environmental non-government organization that was founded in 1990, and we're driven by our mission, which is to enhance the ecological health of the Annapolis River watershed for current and future generations through science, leadership, and community engagement. So I've already introduced who I am. I guess a few important pieces to throw out there. I am by no means a bird expert, so I know enough that I've been able to help with these surveys and receive some training in the past, but we are very fortunate to have much more experienced birders than myself involved with this program. So if there are any questions that come up and I'm unable to answer them, then I'll definitely record those and go to our expert partners and come back to you guys with answers. So to kick things off, I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're recruiting citizen science volunteers kind of generally. And when we talk about citizen science, that includes any program that gets members of the public out helping to contribute to the collection of data. And so this breeding bird survey work is just one example of those. I think most of you were on the last webinar where we talked about some of the other citizen science programs that we'll have running this summer. So those include Frog Watch, which focuses on identifying species of frogs by ear, work on wood turtles. There's lots of different BioBlitz activities. So if none of the programs we're running are the right fit, we're actually just at almost the point of launching a new website for organizations across Southwest Nova Scotia, and it will highlight the whole breadth of different volunteer opportunities that individuals can get involved with. So as soon as that website's ready to go public, then I'm going to be sharing that pretty broadly. But we've been talking for years about how we need to work more collectively as NGOs across Southwest Nova, and we're finally getting our website together. And that's an initiative that has been led by Mersey Tobiatic Research Institute. When it comes to species at risk, we're seeing some alarming trends. So an increasing number of species that are being listed as at risk, areas of habitat that continue to be lost or degraded. And we know there's still some pretty big data gaps that exist in our knowledge of species of at risk occurrence, as well as non-species at risk. In many cases, you'll find that species are not listed because they're considered data deficient. There's not enough information to make a conclusive decision either way. And this data is really important because it's needed by land managers to make good decisions and by NGOs or other conservation partners in order to support land managers in making those decisions. And I think one of the realities we just have to face is there's probably never going to be enough funding to have kind of academics, professional scientists, consultants go out and do all the data collection. So citizen science is a really great opportunity for leveraging the knowledge and interest of a wide range of individuals who are totally capable of collecting this information in a much more cost-effective way and in much greater numbers. So Up here is a diagram from a couple of years ago now, tracks data up to 2016, but it's still relatively recent. And one of the reasons I show this is, it gives you a sense of the trends for different guilds of birds across Canada. But the program we're going to be talking about today really focuses on aerial insectivores, and I guess Canada Warbler wouldn't fit in that aerial insectivore group, but in forest birds. But you can really see we have an alarming trend of decline with a loss between 1970 and 2016 of 59% of aerial insectivores in Canada. So this program covers two birds that fit within that guild, olive-sided flycatcher and Eastern Wood Pewee. And I know Maggie, who's on this call, is really involved in chimney swift monitoring, so they're another bird that would fit in that group. But there are a guild of birds that we're particularly concerned with. And give me a second, I have some dinner stuck in my throat, so I got to work on that. Sorry about that. Okay, and I do see you jumping in and out because you're losing your connection. I was having a lot of internet trouble just before we logged on too, so hopefully I maintain with a stable connection. But if you are losing me, maybe let me know in the text box, or in the chat box, sorry. So our involvement in work with forested wetland breeding birds came out of an initiative across Southwest Nova Scotia called the Guestboat Conservation Initiative, which involves a collaborative of government, non-government, academic partners who are working together to address species at risk conservation. And we had the good fortune of being able to initiate a partnership with Dr. Cindy Stacer, who's retired but very active at Dalhousie University, who had been working for a number of years on a suite of forested wetland breeding bird species. And so with this program, we have 4 target species that we're looking at. Olive-sided flycatcher, and you'll see up here I've indicated the listings under the Federal Species at Risk Act and the Nova Scotia Endangered Species Act. So it is possible to have a different listing, both federally versus provincially. In some cases, you may even find species that are listed under one piece of legislation and not the other. So we had olive-sided flycatcher. We have the rusty blackbird, which is special concern and provincially listed as endangered. The Canada Warbler, which is listed as endangered at a federal level and threatened in Nova Scotia, and the Eastern Wood Pewee, which is listed as vulnerable in Canada and special concern in Nova Scotia. And just in case anyone is unfamiliar with what those different species at risk designations means, they're really similar schemes between the provincial and Federal Species at Risk Act listings. You'll just see slightly different terminology with vulnerable being exchanged for special concern. But basically, we can think of it as kind of the far end of the spectrum being a species that is extinct. It no longer exists anywhere in the world. After that, we might see a population become extirpated. So when a species no longer exists in the wild in a designated region. So it could be within a country, a province, or even something a little more fine scale. From there, we have species that are endangered. So those species that are facing imminent risk of extirpation or extinction. We then have threatened, which is a species that is likely to become endangered if nothing is done to reverse the factors that are leading to that listing. And then special concern or vulnerable, which are species that may become threatened or endangered because of a combination of biological characteristics and identified threats. And so The plan for tonight is to initially work through some really basic identification for our 4 target species. That will include listening to their calls by ear. And I will also be sending out a package to people that has all this information in print. So this isn't the only, like, you don't have to memorize all of this now. But after we take a look at the 4 target species and the habitats we use, I'll talk about what the protocol looks like overall. So what are the different data sheets that you'll be asked to complete, and what is the process for going out and working through those data sheets. So we'll start off by talking about our first target species, which is the olive-sided flycatcher. We have an individual pictured up here. And so one of the characteristics I personally use to identify this bird is its dark vest. So if you can see the plumage on its breast, you can see that it's got white in the center, and it kind of looks like it's got an olive colored vest that it's wearing. They have an olivey gray or brown color and very pale wing bars, a relatively short tail, and no eye-ring, so no light color, which, like when we see the Canada Warbler, you'll see an example of what an eye-ring would look like. And I guess another point with these birds, you're not going to see very much difference between male or female. So visually, you're not looking to identify male or female anyway, so don't worry about that. So in terms of where to look for them, you're going to want to look up on prominent branches of conifers or on snags, which are standing dead trees. They're often surveying for insects, which they're then going to sally out to prey on, or they may be making their calls from those kind of prominent perching points. Only the males will sing, but both males and females will give calls. In a second, I'll switch over so we can listen to both a call and a song recording. A male olive-sided flycatcher will sing to establish and defend their territories and to attract mates. This one has a little kind of reminder you can use. Its call sounds a bit like quick 3 beers. And it is quite a loud song. It can be heard pretty clearly from as far as 100 meters away. So this is one that's great to learn as a beginner because it's super recognizable and pretty easy to discern once it is calling. Their call is a little harder to differentiate than their song. It's an evenly spaced pip, pip, pip. I guess the level of challenge depends on your birding experience and confidence. So I'm going to flip us over to listen to those recordings. So we want the olive-sided flycatcher. And we're going to listen to a song first. Hopefully that came through for you. You should have heard their song 3 times. Quick 3 beer, quick 3 beer. And we will have a quick listen to one of their calls. Don't have a lot of Eastern options here, but that's okay. So that's that evenly spaced pip, 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 or pip, pip. Jump back to my slides. And one of the things that I will share electronically, I forget if I mentioned this, is we do have a series of recordings that were taken in Nova Scotia. So this bird has a call that's pretty easy to recognize even between different regions. It doesn't have too strong of a dialect, but it is sometimes nice to hear what our local birds sound like, because there can be little kind of nuances to it. So in terms of habitat, olive-sided flycatcher have a preference for spruce-dominated forests with lots of edge habitat. So that could be a habitat surrounding some type of wetland or along a riparian area. So something that creates that kind of stark contrast between an open space, which often provides really excellent area for insects that are flying about, and then opportunity for those birds to be foraging and then perching on those edges. Um, in Nova Scotia, they're often found in habitats containing black spruce, red spruce, balsam fir, eastern hemlock, and tamarack. Um, and so on the bottom photo, you can see a site that we've surveyed in Millville. And then the top photo is taken in Southwest Nova Scotia, but I can't tell you the precise location. And it's in addition to using natural clearings that are caused by wetlands or aquatic habitats, you may also find these birds in areas that have been opened through human activities such as harvesting or through forest fire events. So one of, I don't want to get too far off track, but one of the kind of ways we'll be using this data is to support a project that's exploring different beneficial management practices to create breeding habitat for these species. And so we're interested in having volunteers survey control sites, so sites in which there's no forestry activity taking place, but also sites where there is active harvesting that has either happened in a previous year or we know will be happening in future years, so that we can see how those different interventions and forestry activities change use of the site. So that's our first species covered, olive-sided flycatcher, quick, 3 beer, and he's wearing a vest. We will also mail out one of these sheets to you guys, which has it's a cheat sheet. It has all of those notes on call, habitat use, visual observations, other important features, typical nest placement. So don't have to memorize everything. Our next species is the Canada Warbler. So really pretty little warbler. You are going to see some difference between males and females in this case. So on the left, we have a male who has kind of a dark slate or bluish gray upper part, then a bright yellow and a neck and breast, and a black necklace. So that black necklace is a pretty key feature that you're going to be looking for, particularly on males. It will be present on females, but it's a lot lighter. You may not really see females too much. In the surveys I've participated in, when we have had Canada Warbler on the site and we're using playback, so using an audio recording to try and get a response from the birds, we've usually been able to visually detect the male Canada Warbler as well as hear them, but not females. They're probably going to be on the nest and they're not going to risk coming off. So because Canada Warblers spend most of their time in the dense undergrowth, you are much more likely to hear them than see them. But again, you do have a pretty good chance of seeing a male if you are in a site that supports them. And it is only the male that is going to sing. So he is singing either to establish or to defend his territory and attract a mate. And this little rhyme, take it with a grain of salt. Some people remember the call by, look, a pretty little yellow bird with a necklace over there. Really, it's a quick tumbling series of notes, and there's no great rhyme for it, so it's best if we just listen to it. So we're gonna flip over to the recording again. Oh, I think I shared the wrong screen. Sorry about that. So get ready for the Canada Warbler. I'm hoping everyone's able to hear this. So there's a high degree of variation in those calls. We'll play a different recording just so you can contrast it. One of the things you can listen for is that little kind of chip at the beginning of the song. So Kathy's saying she's not hearing the song, so I apologize because probably a big lull there. Can anyone else confirm whether they're hearing the calls? I thought Randy had said he was able to.
So, Katie, but it's fairly faint.
It's really faint. Okay, I can try to adjust the audio level to see if that helps out. I actually was afraid I was blasting people's ears because it was so loud the first time for me. So let me try that one again at a higher volume. If you felt the volume was already adequate, maybe be ready to pull your earplugs out. Not sure how well this will make a difference or not. And I can also try this a different way, which is if I just play the recording off my app, and it may not be quite the same quality, but it will overcome the issue of some people not hearing things altogether. If anyone is interested in a what I think is a good app for bird identification, I use just the free version of Merlin, and you can download packs for different regions, and it will store the data when you're on your phone. So when you're not connected to Wi-Fi or to data, you can access that, which for me is important because I don't have a data plan. But we're going to pull up Canada Warbler. And I'm going to play the song. Is that coming through at all?
Yeah, it was, but you could also hear the white-throated sparrow
Yeah. Some of these recordings
in
have
the
multiple
background.
birds on the track. So we will, like in the ones I'll send online, they're a little more cleaned up, and we have kind of the time marks that you can look for the call to differentiate the two. But it is one, again, it's a bit of a jumble. Like there's no perfect rhyme that works for this one. In terms of habitat, what you're going to be looking for with Canada Warbler is a mess. So you want to see a pretty dense understory that has a mix of kind of ferns and herbaceous plants, mosses, kind of lower growing shrubs. So they want a thick understory that's mixed vegetation. You're often going to find them in areas that have cinnamon fern and sphagnum mosses, so indicating that it's probably a pretty wet area. And they do like areas that have kind of a low canopy, maybe some opening, and some snags, or so standing dead trees to perch on. But it's really that thick and messy understory that you're really going to need to have for these birds. So a lot of swamp sites we've found them in. And I think one of the things people sometimes worry about in terms of site selection is like, do they need to be remote sites? Am I going to be able to find something that's accessible? I live on Granville Road in Granville Ferry, and there's a site where every year for the past 3 years, it's like less than 1 minute walk right off of the Hollow Mountain Road, so a maintained roadway. and there's a Canada Warbler who kind of breeds in the back there. So there are going to be sites that are accessible to people. Just because they're forested wetlands doesn't mean it has to be a completely inaccessible site, in case that's something that you're worried about. And if you're not, that's great. We'll send you out to the really challenging remote sites. So our next species is the rusty blackbird. And this is actually the first species that we're hoping people will start to survey for, because they have a slightly earlier migration and breeding season. They are kind of tricky to identify because they are quite similar looking to some other birds. So people might mix them up with the grackle, for example. They're a like a lot of variation in color, but somewhere from black to kind of rusty, browny, maybe a bit of gray. They do have a pale eye and a relatively slender bill, but they can be a little bit tricky to identify on their own. And the other piece that makes it really hard is there's so few of them that it's hard to get practice identifying them, because you're going to be really lucky if you see one in the first place. So this is not a species that we have observed in our surveys. I think even in Dr. Stacer's work last year, they only had a handful of detections. So the one we're really interested in, but seem to be doing quite poorly in terms of population. And one of the funny things is, you may recall they're listed as special concern at a federal level, which is actually relatively low on that spectrum of designations. But one of the things that contributes to that is just the lack of data that is available for this species. So instead of switching to the other screen, I'm just going to pull up the recording on this app and try it that way. Sorry, there's some background noise. Brian's doing something. I'm at home. Could you hear that?
Yep, could hear it fine.
Yes,
It sounds like someone's like got a scratched up tape recorder they're rewinding or something. Certainly not a beautiful call, but I'm going to play it again along with song and call. So it's kind of described as a squeaky whistling sound. It's not unlike what you hear from, like, I guess even some of the calls like red-winged blackbirds and others make. And it's kind of like more of a noise than a song when I remember it anyway. So again, with this bird, a little challenging to identify because there's relatively few field marks that you can use on them. In terms of habitat use, they're often found on the edges of bogs or forested wetlands, particularly in coniferous-dominated wet areas. They can often be found probing around in the mud for food. So they eat a lot of benthic invertebrates, so they'll be kind of leafing around in puddles to pull out the larval form of bugs to eat. And you're going to be listening for them singing in April and May. So the survey window for this species I have in an upcoming slide, but it starts as early, I think, as April 24th. And really after May, they're going to become pretty quiet and hard to detect. So reminder for the song, you can think of a tape being fast forwarded, interspersed by those kind of check notes. And quite variable in habitat use. So kind of, I would say, the trickiest one to identify of the 4 target species that we're going to be talking about. So this is where, if it's possible, it's always really great to get photos when you're in the field. It can be pretty tough with birds because you might be at quite a distance. but also taking recordings if you have an opportunity to hear them singing and can record that. That's another way we can help to verify identifications if you're not too confident in what you're seeing. And that's something I'll talk about again later. And we're going to move to our fourth and final species, which is the Eastern Wood Pewee. So cute little aerial insectivore, has a much more, it's not a dusky vest. It's very light. It's nowhere near as prominent as what you'd see on the olive-sided flycatcher. But you can on these look for two much more distinct wing bars. So those light colored bars coming across the wing, and a relatively dark head with a weak eye ring. So a weak white or lighter colored ring around its eye. Again, the males and females are going to be similar in appearance. They have relatively short legs. They're going to have an upright posture and a peaked crown that tends to give them a bit of a triangular shape. They're olive gray in color and little to no yellow on their underparts. Those wing bars are a great field mark that you can look for. The underside of the bill is orange, so if you are making a visual detection, that's something that you can take a look for. And the good thing is they have a really distinct call and they are prolific singers. So I'm going to cue up their POE call. But any of the sites, we've detected them on quite a few sites where we weren't necessarily doing breeding bird surveys, but when they're there, they're just singing all day. So they were really easy to pick out. Okay. So hopefully you could hear that, but it's gonna be a P, and then the second call is often getting lower, so P, and about a second total length, and they're gonna call usually continually, and they'll call throughout the day. So this is one that you can get lucky and detect even if you're not a morning person and don't make it out for that sunrise survey window that we're gonna recommend. So like many other aerial insectivores, they will sally out flying insects. So they're going to perch on high branches or on snags and then return to that perch after making a round out to snatch up their prey. And they're most commonly found in deciduous forests and woodlands, but you may find them in a pretty varied type of, pretty broad variety of habitat types. So this is same wetland I think I had posted up for the olive-sided flycatcher because we have made detections for both species at that same site that includes kind of a beaver-created wetland and the adjacent swamp and bog, and then upland forest and agricultural field. So those are our 4 target species. And again, I'm going to send a package with recordings and our little cheat sheet with details about each of the species. And the nice thing is when you're going out into the field, even if you're not confident that you've memorized these 4 calls, if you do have a smartphone, you can download an app like Merlin and bring the recording with you just to give yourself a reminder. We're going to talk about playback, which is when you broadcast a recording. But one of the things you will want to keep in mind is that if you're listening on your phone, just as a little reminder, you don't want to play it too loud, or ideally you want to have headphones or earbuds in because you can accidentally call a bird back when you're checking or testing your own knowledge of the bird calls. So I'll touch on that again when we talk about playback. So the next little bit is going to focus on the protocol itself, starting with when to survey. So the target is to be out during the breeding season for each of these species. And like I mentioned, the rusty blackbird does have a slightly earlier breeding season. So the target window for surveys for rusty blackbird is April 24th through June 30th. Although after May, your chances of detection are much lower. That being said, if you were going out targeting one of the other species, it would also be worth being on the lookout for rusty blackbird. And then kind of the peak survey window for our other three species is May 20th through July 20th. Although there's pretty good chances if you're out slightly earlier, you're going to be able to hear these species calling as well. So don't let that start date deter you from getting out sooner if you're feeling motivated. We're hoping for volunteers to select at least one site, multiple sites is great, and visit that site between 1 and 3 times as is needed. So if you're out and on the first time you make a positive detection and you're 100% confident in what you've heard, then there is no need to actually return. If you don't want to, you could maybe spend your time going to different sites. But if you don't make a positive detection, it doesn't mean the species isn't there. So we do ask you to repeat a survey at that same site up to 3 times in total. You may even try a couple more if you think, this just seems like a really great quality site. Could have just been my luck on that day. Visiting more is okay. So a playback survey is a survey where you're going to broadcast an audio recording of your target species, and that increases the likelihood that you're going to pull the males out of hiding and hopefully make a positive detection if they are at the site. So we have typically just used our smartphones directly and turn the volume up. It's almost to its maximum level with my phone, although each phone is a little different. But you're going to want it to be comparable to the volume that you're hearing other birds call at around you. You can also get a Bluetooth speaker that you can use if you don't have a speaker option in your phone or the quality is not good enough. We do have a few speakers that volunteers are able to borrow, and that will just improve the quality of the playback that you're able to use. So if you do have a device to record audio, then we suggest taking advantage of that. So before you start your survey, I use an app called Voice Memo. We also sometimes use kind of it's just like a little microphone with a damper around it. Turn it on and start by stating your name, the date, the location, and that you're beginning your recording. And so that's our way of connecting any of the subsequent songs and calls that we hear with the specific survey data. So starting with Rusty Blackbird, although it really doesn't matter what order you do this in, you'll play 30 seconds of the playback recordings, and these are recordings that we'll provide for you. And then you're going to sit and listen for a period of 5 minutes, and you're listening specifically for that species that you played the recording for. If there's no detection after that 5-minute listening period, you can move on to the next species and play, in this case, a 30-second recording of olive-sided flycatcher. And again, that's followed by a 5-minute listening period. So in total, as you move through this, if you're going to play recordings for all 4 species, you're going to have 20 minutes of dedicated listening, as well as that time in between for setting up your device and playing your 30-second recordings. And then at the end of your survey, if you can just take whatever your recording device is, indicate that you are ending your survey, stop your recording, and if there is anything to kind of clean up in your notebook, and we'll take a look at the data sheets later on, that's your opportunity to take that. We ask for at least 4 sites of the 4 photos of the site. So 1 in each of the cardinal directions. So you'll need to either bring a compass or again have an app that can be used for a compass or just a really good sense of direction. and you're going to take north, south, east, and western facing photos. You're going to complete all of the habitat data on your site information data sheet. And if you're repeating a site, you really only need to complete that habitat information once, unless something really significant happened in between, which sometimes happens. We had a site where we were monitoring, and again, it was one that was really close to a road's edge, and they came through and kind of did the bush hogging for the year. So there was a kind of substantial change to where that site ended and the amount of opening to the road. So we did make sure for the subsequent data sheet, we indicated those changes in habitat. And then once you're done that, you're going to navigate to your next site and repeat the process. Some sites may be large enough that you have multiple survey points. Others may be small enough that you're going to a central area and just doing a single series of playback sessions for each of the target species. So the top of your data form will look something like this, but it won't say 2018. And it's going to capture really basic information about who you are, where you are, what are the weather conditions. Ideally, you will provide some type of geographic reference, either as a latitude, longitude, or as a UTM. It's also great if you can send a Google map point as well. And I guess if you, for some reason, can't record that long Google map point or anything else, then we will figure out somehow to indicate what your specific location is. But I can't underemphasize the importance of having complete location data, observed data, dates, all those basic things, just so we can keep track of where all this information is coming through and make sure that it's useful to both ourselves as well as academic and research partners in the future. There are a series of habitat questions that you are going to either check yes or no to, or circle the most appropriate answer. If you're really not sure which way to answer, we can try and help you that out by using photos as a way to interpret what is being seen. So if you're not sure of what to indicate for the habitat, your best guess is probably sufficient, but you can take some additional photos and then we'll use that information to help guide you through what the correct answers would be. I guess I should also point out, when we do in-field training, it's really helpful for gaining some confidence on what to check on your data sheets. There's then a section on the data sheet that provides a space for recording any data that results from your playback surveys. So this older sheet doesn't have Eastern Wood Pewee, but the new data sheets will. So did you use playback, yes or no? How many detections, either before or after playback? How did the bird respond to playback? So it may have flown out towards you and perched, or it might have shown agitated behavior. This is something qualitative that you're just going to describe in whatever way you feel is appropriate. If you're able to estimate whether it's a juvenile or adult, male or female, then that's great, but it's by no means necessary. We're just happy to know that the species is present. Breeding evidence might be something kind of like that agitated nest guarding type of behavior, or maybe you're seeing a bird that's carrying food back to a location. So often later in the breeding season, carrying food back to their chicks. So that's something that you could write in your notes there. And you're doing awesome if you have all 3 species or all 4 species detected in a survey, but it's often just going to be 1, maybe none. Some other kind of tips and reminders for playback surveys. Speaker can increase the quality of your playback, but a recording from a cell phone will suffice. You want to match your volume to something similar to birds in the other area. Don't necessarily just blast it as loud as you can. And only use playback for your target species once at each of your survey points. So there's this balance that needs to be found between the stress that is caused to birds by calling them out using playback, and that research value of making the detection. So there's a really good resource, and this will become in your digital packages from Sibley on ethical use of playback in birding. So again, if you are learning bird sounds and you need to listen to a recording as a reminder, make sure it's super quiet or you're using headphones so that you're not accidentally calling, like providing playback when you don't mean to be. And again, take a recording. Even if you're like, man, I really don't know what these bird calls sound like, I'm not going to be able to confidently ID them. We do have volunteers who can't get out in the field, so we can take those recordings and provide them to them, and they can use their expertise and your ability to get to the site, and it's a perfect match. So we just went over one of the protocols that's used, which is playback. We do have an option for just a point count. So a listening survey that takes place with no recordings used. And then there's also an option to do a hybrid, which would be a point count with playback. And so with our point count, we're going to have 10-minute listening periods where you're essentially standing still in one place silently and recording all of the observations, visual or vocal, of the target species that you detect on a data sheet. I'm going to show that next. If you're an experienced birder and you're able to add additional species into your survey, that's fantastic, and we'll make sure that information gets shared with research partners, and it's definitely valuable, but I don't want to scare people away. You can just focus on these 4 target species, or maybe even go to a site that you think would be suitable for a single target species. Just focus on that. I'm going to flip so you can see our point count sheet has a circle. You, in theory, are standing in the middle, and it's really helpful if you have your sheet on the clipboard and you orient yourself so that you're facing north and your field sheet is facing up so that everything's lined up. And then I can go, okay, I heard that to about 45 degrees left. And I think it was about 10 meters away. And then I can put my point where I'm approximating the bird to be. If you're not sure on distance whatsoever, you can just work on identifying the quadrant that you hear the species in. Or if it's just too much and too confusing to try and place the species around you, you can just have a running tally of the birds that you're hearing. Again, if we're narrowing down things to these 4 target species, it means there's probably not too much activity that it doesn't become too overwhelming. Because definitely there's a learning curve for doing point counts for all species on a site. And that if you're a new birder might be a little much to start with. So narrowing and down and honing in on a target species is definitely recommended. So you're going to have your north arrow on the data sheet facing north so that you can easily place birds around you on your sheet. There is a code sheet that comes with this so that you can indicate species, sex, and type of detection. So whether it's a song, a call, a drum, or visual. Again, this is great if you have the experience to use those codes. If not, we're just focusing on the basics of seeing or hearing our 4 target species. You'll estimate the distance that you heard the bird in, and you'll separate detections of each bird by different intervals of time. And then say I was going full out, I'm an experienced birder, I've got little observations listed all over this sheet. I am then going to just transcribe that on the other side of the form into a running list of birds, and it's going to have that list of all of the individuals which I heard during my 10-minute listening window during my point count. So this is kind of the more advanced option. If all you want to do is this simple playback survey, 5-minute listening periods, that's fantastic. That's super useful. So in terms of site selection, this is a project where there's opportunity to participate across Nova Scotia. We're a little better positioned to help people out in the Annapolis River watershed, so roughly that area between Digby and Aylesford. But we have lots of great partners across the province that we can hook you up with if you are outside of the watershed and interested in participating in. People may come with their own ideas for survey sites, and that's fantastic. Maybe it's your own property or a family property. Definitely, we encourage people to identify prospective sites that they might know about. But if you're really keen to participate and you are not sure of a site, then we can help identify sites for you. And so often one of the first things we're going to look at is wetland information so that we can look for our right habitat types and maybe pair that with some of our local knowledge that has been gained through other projects. Because there is kind of a running list of sites that we've seen that it's like, oh man, that looks like it would be good. If only we could get someone out there. So we'll work with people to identify sites. There may be things like accessibility and safety that need to be considered. There are some sites that probably have these birds, but it's just not going to be feasible within the scope of a volunteer program. Which brings me to safety precautions. So on top of everything else, we do want to make sure everyone is adhering to COVID-19 related public health guidelines. We're quite fortunate that this is a volunteer program that really is quite compatible with how things are right now. So it gives you a chance to be outdoors, really good for your mental and physical health. You're able to socially distance. So there shouldn't be too many barriers at this point in time as a result of COVID-19. But if things do change, it's a bit of a different scenario when I was talking about this last year, then just make sure you're always adhering to those public health guidelines. Choose your site based on both your experience and comfort level. So if you don't like a lot of hiking through tough terrain, don't choose a super remote wetland area. Whenever possible, go out with someone. I say whenever possible because the reality is some of us are just kind of independent and going to do it anyway. So I don't want to pretend that's not going to happen. But if you are one of those people, I'm one of those people, not when I'm at work, but when I'm on my personal time. Make sure that you tell someone where you're going. So the access points that you might use, where you plan to park, an approximate start and end time. And if there's no one that you have available to tell, then you can send me an email or text with that information so that we can check back in with you and say, hey, did you get out safe? And if not, we can follow up from there. It'd be very similar to what we do with our own field staff when they're going out on remote sites. Make sure you pack all of the safety equipment that you need. I would recommend always bringing a compass and taking a safety bearing. We'll practice that in the field. Your phone can die, your phone can fall in the wetland, a lot of things can happen to it. And when you're looking down or super focused on birds or like get super focused on maybe a cool plant you see, it is very easy to get disoriented in these habitats. So I really think it's important to have a compass. If you're on a trail, maybe that's less important, but why not just pack it anyway? And then my rule is pack as if you're gonna get lost or delayed. So bring water, food. I bring a flashlight at 6 in the morning, spare layers, rain jacket, just easier to be prepared. In terms of submitting results, we can either take people's digitized or transcribed data sheets electronically, or if people just want to do their pencil sheets and they have relatively nice handwriting, those can be dropped off or mailed to us and we can do all that transcription for you. In past years, we'd ask people to submit data through eBird, but I find it's just an extra headache that we don't need. So it's easier just to get the data sheets directly. And it's really great if you're making positive detections for any of these target species, just to send us an update as you're going, because that might create an opportunity for us to start looking into opportunities. It's kind of a redundant way to say that. It might create an opportunity for us to start thinking about, can we engage with that landowner in stewardship practices? Is this a site that might fit into the forestry beneficial management practices project? So the more you're able to keep us up to date, particularly with positive identifications for the target species, then the better. And before I wrap up, I do want to mention again, we are planning to do in-field training. Cindy just has to let me know about her availability, but she's going to come down and we're hoping to do kind of a site tour to look at different suitable habitat types, as well as to do some group surveys. If you're someone who would like to go out with other individuals but doesn't necessarily know those people, then we're happy to kind of help make those connections. And we do have a few community members who are experienced birders who have volunteered to help out novice birders. So if you feel like you fit in either of those categories, so you're someone who's willing to help others or looking for the support of others, that's something else you can let us know, and we'll do the best we can to be a matchmaker for you. So yes, there's a lot at once, and you don't have the data sheets in hand, but you will get them. But it's not as hard as it might sound. So I hope we're able to convince you guys to get out. But are there any questions I can answer now before we do think about kind of more detailed stuff we can cover during our in-field session?
So Katie, can you hear me? This is
Katie, I'm just wondering about.
Go ahead, Maggie.
Oh, okay, thanks. I was just wondering about when you were first speaking about doing the playback survey, and it sounded as if you'd be going to a site where you would be looking for all 4 species, but the habitat's going to be different for most of them, but maybe you know of sites where they would sort of all somehow mesh together or something. Because as I was watching it, I could visualize where I would go, a place that I know, with cinnamon ferns and that sort of thing for the Canada Warbler, but it probably wouldn't be suitable, say, for the rusty blackbird. So it would be kind of neat to go with somebody who could do lots of them in one spot, maybe.
Yeah, and like you're kind of right on with that. Most of the sites are going to be more suitable for maybe olive-sided flycatcher and or Eastern Wood Pewee, or Canada Warbler or rusty blackbird. But in most cases, we just do them all just in case. It's like you're there anyway. If you've got the time, then why not? But that being said, there are a few sites where we don't bother with olive-sided flycatcher and Eastern Wood Pewee because there is no foraging habitat available. It just it's so unsuitable. It doesn't seem worth the time. And that's one of the reasons we're hoping to do kind of that habitat tour with Cindy, so that she can help to really help people be able to hone in on different habitat characteristics that the birds are looking for, and that therefore the surveys should be focusing on when they're selecting target species.
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
We kind of just do rusty blackbird everywhere because it feels like such a shot in the dark to detect one.
Yeah, I have to confess that's one I've never focused on, never really even thought about, whereas the other 3 I've been familiar with over the years. So yeah.
And did you also have a question?
Yeah, Katie. So I have a site in mind near Middleton here, but how big of a range? This is the first time we've done any sort of birding. So how big of a range should your site have? Like when you go out, are you walking across acres, or is it a very small site you're selecting?
Oh, with offhand, I can't think of a minimum habitat size preferences, but we have some very small habitat patches that we've made detections in. And like with some of our Eastern Wood Pewee sites, they're in highly disturbed, so like they're in like semi-urban or residential neighborhoods, and there's positive identifications. So it doesn't have to be huge. I'm not sure if you're thinking, you showed me a property that you guys purchased. Is that the one you're thinking of? Because after you showed me that, like I was thinking like too, 'cause it looks like it has some really great wetland habitat. That would probably be a really good one to do some surveys on.
Right. So do I just start kind of walking around, or do you stay in one much more prescribed site? I mean, I don't know how to start out when you're just kind of, it's a shot in the dark, right?
Yeah, so I would probably start with kind of a reconnaissance survey where you're going out just to look at the habitat, and taking this kind of cheat sheet that we'll have with pictures of the preferred habitat and a description of characteristics, and looking to see if you can match up what the birds are looking for with what you're seeing on the landscape. So is there an area of swamp? And if so, then choosing a point within the swamp that at some point is going to become where can I safely and conveniently survey from because it's dry enough that I can stand here. With the Canada Warbler, some of the sites we used, it was just trial and error at first. So we would move a few hundred meters between points to do individual surveys. But one of the things we could think about planning to do, if you're open for it, is maybe coordinating one of those training sessions to happen on that property so we can go out as a group there and take a look at the habitat together.
We would love that.
Yeah, can I go?
Yes, we'd love that. So we invite you. Yes.
Okay, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, good. So will you get in touch with us anytime? We'd be very, very open to that.
Great. Okay, yeah.
Good.
And I'll have everyone's email address because you all registered for this session. So that's what I'm going to be using to send all the follow-up information to. So if for some reason that wasn't a good email address to use, then maybe just send me an email otherwise with your preferred contact information. Okay, so we are hoping within, what is it now? It's mid-April. Keep losing track of time. We're hoping kind of early May. Well, that's not true. We want to be out a little earlier for Rusty Blackbird surveys. So if I can get Cindy down here to help with Rusty Blackbirds earlier, that will be great. It may not work out, but some of our other staff and volunteers will be kind of getting ready to go within the next couple of weeks. So what I'll do with this program is keep a mailing list that can grow throughout the season. And as we're planning field days and training days, share that information. If people want to register for events, then they can sign up and we can coordinate details from there. And if people do have a property in mind that they'd like to coordinate a group survey on, so places like Anne's property near Middleton, then we're more than happy to kind of fit that into the plan for this spring. I guess this is a time I can also mention, oh, Randy, you might have to remind me of the date, but we're working with the, I'm going to get it wrong, the Arlington Protected Forest Society, or those words come in a different order. But we're coordinating a BioBlitz focused on breeding birds on a property off the Arlington Road. And so information on that is going to be shared pretty soon, but that'll be part of the City Nature Challenge, which is a big BioBlitz event coming up at the end of April into the first week of May. Okay, well, I won't keep you guys any longer. Thank you so much for spending your time this evening learning about this program. And I'm really excited to get out with everyone this spring. Bye.
Thank you, Katie. It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. That was great.
Thanks.